Hello! After 2 weeks. The reason being, I have been going through a very challenging time. I was told recently that I'm going through a clearing of the mental body. The emotional one is more or less complete. I wouldn't say it's easier, but the mental body is anguish because you can't always get to what it is. You can't cry it out. So it's a mental process, and I'm going back very, very deep, very, very deep. So it's been quite a challenging time. I'm still pretty exhausted, but I needed to do this video. I get obsession on me, if you know what I mean. So anyway, I'm doing it at night time because the daylight, for some reason, there is such a light pouring in behind me that you wouldn't be able to see, which I suppose is my light. I don't know. When you're in it, you don't feel it, do you? So basically, this video is about the paddock cottage where I had this man friend. But I just want to tell you briefly about how this started, because I'm really actually abused by a high master. Now that sounds a bit strange because you think the hierarchy is more love and light. They're not. A lot of these masters still haven't handled their power, and they can misuse it if they choose to. Some of them are really, really quite destructive. They've got anger in them, they react very violently. Some of them, and I work with the masters as you know, but some of them really have got a lot to learn, especially about the feminine. They're still they're still at it. They're still learning. We're all still learning. And I was thinking of something that happened in the past. I was thinking about it, and suddenly this very, very powerful energy hit me from the right hand side. Fortunately, I have another master. I have lots of them watching out for me, and they did sort of, well, not say anything, they don't speak, but I had the feeling that this wasn't right, and I knew who it was, and I challenged him. To challenge a master of that degree is asking for trouble, but there are certain laws they have to obey, I am being looked after. But it took a lot out of me. When you've got to handle that kind of power coming from that kind of realm, it does knock you for six. So that's one of the things which leads me on to this man friend that I found at the paddock cottage. She lived at Orchard Cottage next door. We got together initially. The little cottages were very sweet and had little fires, and we used to have lovely times together. We never spent an evening together though. It was just the sex, just the companionship. We used to go out sometimes, but I was aware that there was, well, his family didn't like me, so he had to be a bit careful, I think, and their family eventually turned him against me. But he was a man of power, very shy, very retiring, a fantastic charisma, but he had something about him that wasn't quite nice. I found out what it was. He was actually in a past life the Emperor Commodus. Now, you might not know about the Emperor Commodus. He was the guy in the oh dear, I can't think of it now. The Emperor Commodus, he was a very nasty emperor. Most of the emperors were actually. But this one particularly was a fighter, and he was very cruel to women. He used to drag them in off the streets, have sex with them and beat them up and what have you. And this was a re-meeting with this Emperor Commodus. Can you imagine it? Can you imagine it? I didn't know at the time, but you see, there's a drawer. With soulmates, there's a drawer. And I was obviously working through some karma. He brought the very worst out in me. And I'm ashamed to say it now, but I know there's a purpose in all these things. And he's not alive now, so I can talk about him a little bit. I've actually written a book called Betrayal, which is all about our relationship, because it was pretty disastrous. I learnt a lot. It was spiritual, it was psychic, it was dangerous, he was an abuser. So initially we got together, and it was a lovely time. Well, I thought it was anyway, but there was something about him that I could never put my finger on. I went to see him in his cottage one morning. He was still in bed, and the thought came to me, take great care. And I didn't take great care, and I eventually had to suffer for it. But initially it was a friendship, and I've now realised, I've done a video on this, and I realised that once you've had a sex with a man, they often turn against you. Not all, I'm not saying all, but some of them, once they get what they want, they can turn against you. It often ruins a friendship. I had a friend once, and she used to say she had two men friends in her life, one for sex and one for friendship. You couldn't get them together. And it's true, we were such friends. We used to go on and have a laugh. But once you had the then he considered me, because his mother would tell him all women were sluts. So once we had this relationship, and it was kind of a relationship, he turned against me, and his family didn't like me. So the poor man had all his sexuality awakened after what, he was in his 70s. I mean, by goodness me, he was quite something in his 70s, but his wife had died 10 years earlier, so he was almost, I mean, I woke him up kind of thing, you know. And whether his family sensed it or not, I don't know, but they were very jealous, because he obviously cared about me, and we got on really well, but they got jealous, turned him against me. So he had all this sexuality, he had to take it out somewhere, so he turned to the girls, you know, the prostitutes, and it cost him a fortune. And when it came out, he told his family that I'd had it. So it was a very, very strange relationship. I was going to check the time a minute. It was a very strange relationship, and I persisted with it. To this day, I'm not quite sure why. I suppose I was lonely, and I did love him, and he loved me, what I thought he did. But it turned out actually that he had been a crusader. You may not, I mean, those of you that don't believe in past lives, you just have to skim this bit. But it's got a lot of answers, you know, especially when you find out from personal experience, you know. And he had been a crusader, and he was very frightened. And he said to me once that he had thought he had a possession, and I said, this soul that came to him said he wanted to go home. Well, of course, he wanted to return to his main station, if you like, you know. So he was a bit afraid. So whether he eventually made it or not, I don't know. But it all got very, very tricky, and we were together, I suppose, for about 5 years, living next door. He eventually moved away, but during these 5 years, I almost lost my mind, trying to work out what was going on. I used to ring psychics and mediums. It cost me, I think I must have got through £10,000. What a waste of money. But I knew I was up against it. I needed help to help me through it, because I was reliving some of the past as well, you see. And he had turned, well, it wasn't violent all the time, but there was one particular occasion, and we were in bed together, and he turned against me and hit me quite hard. And that was very hard to bear, you know, because you love this person, and there's lots of reasons for it, and I don't think I ever forgave him for it, of course, and I was never quite the same again. But this is men of power, you see. Talking about this master, that they have this power, and he had power. I call him Ken. He had power. He'd been I think he perhaps was a master, or a very strong soul anyway. My husband was, and he was violent from time to time. So I seem to keep meeting these men that have misused their power, and of course maybe I have. You see, you look at it and you're trying to work out what's going on. So it was a shame, because we went on holiday together. He's the guy that I went to Rome with. Travelling in my little, what was it, my Bellino, driving up and down to Italy, camping. I think I've told you this, camping, Euro camping, living in tents. And he I don't know when he could drive, but I did most of the driving in my Bellino on the other side of the road. I've got lots of funny stories about that. I think I've told you one about the getting lost in the hotel, not lost, but locked myself out. So it was quite an adventure. We had that together. We went to Malta 2 or 3 times, but looking back, they were all kind of countries that he had been in, and I had been in, probably in Roman times. He had been the Emperor Commodus. Gladiator. Thank you. Gladiator. He was the Emperor Commodus, who actually liked to be a gladiator, and he actually died. Somebody poisoned him, I believe, but he didn't die from poisoning. He died in his bath. And this guy, it was quite odd, he would never get washed. I mean, I was very shocked when we went on holiday together. I think I've told you this, I'm not sure, but I thought you could tell he hadn't washed, you know. It's a very hot country, you know. And I said, get in that shower, have a good shower. And he pretended. He ran the water, but he didn't get washed. He was frightened of water because he died in his bath. And I don't know, this is all, you know, a bit of a laugh as well, take it with a pinch of salt, but for me it was a very real time. And then he moved away and into a bungalow, and it was 15 miles away from where I lived in my little cottage, and I used to chase after him. I used to get this calling, and of course he had power over me, complete power and control, and I didn't know at the time what was going on, but he had this psychic power, and he would call me, and I'd turn out at 10:30 at night, leave my cosy little fire to go and see him. And he was a dirty old man. He lived in an absolutely poverty state. He couldn't look after himself. He moved to this water control bungalow, and I used to go, what am I doing? What am I doing? And of course, now I obviously don't do it now, so it did end at one point. At one point he had a stroke, and I was with him while he had the stroke, which is very distressing, to be honest, and he was put into hospital and eventually a care home. And the care home is another saga, which I might go into one day if you're interested. I don't know what you like. I don't want to bore you with stuff. Some of it's interesting, I guess, but this is a little bit of a sad story, but it isn't in a way, because I've overcome it and I've learned a lot by it. But he did have a stroke and went into hospital. The family turned against me more and more as time went on, because he was lying to them about me. You see, he told their man was a prostitute. They wouldn't speak to me, and I still went on seeing him in the care home and taking him out in my car. And I didn't know really how ill he was, and I was at great disadvantage in a way. Anyway, the upshot is, he's the chap that I did the video about, the park bench. Remember me telling you that he came back after he died and told me what it was like. You may not have seen it. I might put a link on, I don't know. It wasn't so long ago, called the Park Bench, Ascension and Park Bench. And he was obviously very spiritual at some level, but he wasn't allowed to have it on this lifetime. He and I had to work out something together, and he did when there was that. I can remember one little story when he lived next door. I used to follow him. Women watching this will know what I mean. You have to follow them. You have to find out the truth. I never did with him. Never did. He was so bloody clever. He really was. But one particular night, there was a sort of, well, the front lawn was like adjacent, quite near to each other, and he parked his car outside my front lawn. And I used to creep out at night in my nightie with my torch and search his car for clues. Can you believe it? On my knees in the dark, and it was very dark, there was no lighting. I had a spare key, getting into his car, looking for mileage, seat belts, positions of seats, smelling for perfume, looking for tickets. There was nothing. He never said he was so very, very careful. But one day I went in there and I got in the car, and I think I stepped on a grape. He'd put a grape on the floor. He knew I was doing it. He knew, and I squashed his grape. I don't know if I squashed it or not, and I was on my knees searching around in the long grass trying to find this grape. What am I doing? What am I doing? You question yourself. You think, what am I doing? I'm not going to find out the truth. I used to go in his house after he'd left and search things, looking for clues. I was obsessed, actually. Anyway, it came to an end eventually. He moved away to this bungalow, had a stroke and went to hospital, and died. This is about, 20 years ago now. I'm giving my age away. And it's been playing on my mind. In this recent clearing out of the mental body, I had the most awful dream. I was looking for him. I couldn't find him anywhere. He was not anywhere in my dream. And I woke up hysterical. I couldn't find him, obviously, in my subconscious. So I obviously hadn't really let go of him. I had to work very hard on that, because that's blocking me for any future relationships, I guess. So we're coming to the final I've got to be very careful to work it all out. There's so much I could tell you. Anyway, it's in the book, but it will come out one day. So eventually I'm working on this very hard, and there's just 10 years of it. 10 years really of abuse. He did actually hit me quite hard. 10 years of mental, emotional and physical abuse. Brought over from a past life, I guess, I don't know, but I was still really in this, being able to find him. I was obviously still dependent on him at one level. And then it was quite tearful. During a meditation, only last week sometime, week ago, I can't remember, when he was alive, he used to love the library, get his library books, and there was a lovely library in Louth with a seat outside, and I used to meet him there sometimes for a coffee, you know. Anyway, this meditation came up, and I saw him. This spiritual stuff, I think I've mentioned to you before with him, it's real. I mean, there is no doubt it's real. And he was sitting on this bench like he was in the last story, bag on his shoulder with his books, sitting there in the bright sunshine, and I was feeling very unhappy because I'd been with another man friend talking to him, and he had told me that he didn't love me and he wanted to end the whole thing. And I was walking towards Ken, who was sitting on this seat. I'm really quite sitting on this seat with his books, smiling, looking up at me, and I told him, I said, so-and-so's just told me. He said, well, I love you. And with that, just saying that, the whole thing cleared. The whole drama of the abuse, the nightmare, the reconnection, the past life, this particular recent experience, it just vanished. All I can hear him saying is, and I loved you, which goes to prove that love is all we need. Master Peter says, the only love is the love of God. The love of God is all there is. And this man, he's meant it, he said it, and I could see him now, I could hear it. Everything else was wiped out in a moment. Nothing real is threatened, nothing unreal exists, said Master Jesus. Okay, darlings, on that note, I feel worn out.